Welcome back, guys, to another Q&A episode here. This weekend, the first question I've got for you is when to add sets. So this is a super common question, and there's arguments on the interwebs about static volume versus increasing sets versus this versus that, and my opinion kind of falls in the middle of, hey, I probably wouldn't want to add so much sets to where you are just barely recovering every week and barely maintaining performance and not really allowing adaptations to take place and getting really crazy with the increases. But I also think scaling volume to some point makes sense. And I think that just staying at arbitrarily low volume levels to increase strength, I don't think that might be the best idea for hypertrophy. So I kind of fall somewhere in the middle there. And when to add sets, I think that the best time to add sets is when indicators of how you're responding to your current volume might be telling you that, hey, we could bump this stimulus up a little bit and potentially benefit from it. So what might those indicators be? Well, if we're experiencing no issues of overlapping soreness and overlapping fatigue from kind of session to session, and our performance is like just fine, we are over multiple mesocycles, we're getting stronger and that sort of thing, and everything's kind of grooving along nicely, we don't feel under recovered, just generally fatigued and that sort of thing, well, then I think it's reasonable to, hey, maybe for this muscle group, we add 1 to 2 sets next week and see how we respond. And then you can kind of keep doing that depending on how you're responding to your current level of stimulus. And vice versa, if you are noticing overlapping soreness or decreases in your performance or feeling generally over fatigued and stuff like that, do not increase volume. I would take a deload or decrease that training stress and adjust things so you don't run into that overlapping soreness and to being under recovered like that until later on in a mesocycle. All right. So I would add sets when your response to training is kind of telling you that it'd be a relatively good idea to do so, but I wouldn't just arbitrarily say that you should add sets every single week if you're already having a hard time kind of recovering and that sort of thing. And in general, what this looks like for a lot of clients kind of during gaining phases is adding 1 to maybe 3 at the very most sets per muscle per week. Now, if they don't care about a certain muscle group, I might not add any sets, or I probably won't. We might just hang around kind of MV or MEV, depending on what their goals are. Or if they tell me that, hey, this muscle, it felt like it just barely recovered before my session, then I won't add any sets for that one either. All right. Now, during a cutting phase, I'm also more conservative with my setting increases to where during a cutting phase, I might more so at most add 1 set per muscle per week, depending on how someone's recovering. Whereas a gaining phase, I might bump it up to a couple of sets. And the rationale behind that is, hey, during a cutting phase, our MRV might be a little bit lower since we have less resources for recovery coming in via our food. So we might just want to be a little bit more kind of conservative with those jumps in volume. So in general, I tend to add sets when someone's having no problems with recovery between sessions, their performance is going well, they're feeling good. I still think it makes sense to kind of scale volume throughout a mesocycle to some degree. During a gaining phase, on average, maybe a couple sets per muscle per week when you're seeing those indicators and when that muscle is more of a priority for you. During a cutting phase, it might just be 1 set. All right. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of how I kind of approach things. And one thing I do want you to know is like sometimes not scaling sets and not trying to just arbitrarily do high volumes is a really good idea. And I absolutely have clients that respond really well to lower volumes kind of on average. Like my man Ciprian, I will show you his transformation right now. I've been working with him like the last couple of years, and he's probably put on like 20 kilos. And his transformation is ridiculous. And if you look at this guy's volume every week, it's a very basic upper lower split to where we do not get crazy with volume. We barely scale his lower body volume at all. And that's largely because his response from training, he's letting me know that, hey, just decreasing reps in reserve throughout the mesocycle is enough for him to get more stimulus each week, but not kind of tip that scale overboard to where he's doing too much to where he can't recover from it and stuff like that. But now we've got him in a really good place to where, hey, this volume range is very good for him to where, yes, he gets a little bit more kind of stimulus, and we scale that stimulus to some degree, especially for like his delts and his upper body throughout the mesocycle. But for muscle groups that it would be counterproductive to add sets, we don't just arbitrarily add sets. All right. So really, really try to consider that. And like his average volume in a mesocycle, it might be around like, I don't know, 65 or 70 sets on average per week across all muscles, to where I have a lot of clients that are closer to 100 and maybe a little bit above that. All right. So it really does depend. And if I just had him doing 110 sets on average for all of his muscles across the meso, that would be like 30 or 40% too much for him. All right. So really try to pay attention to that. And the next question I had here is when to add reps and weight. So it seems to be a little bit of confusion on, okay, when do I add sets versus when do I add reps versus when do I add weight? So I just covered sets. Now, when to add reps and weight. I don't think you need to get fancy with it. And I think that it can be as simple as just hit your reps in reserve each week. Hit your reps in reserve each week. Have a target rep range, and as long as you're hitting your reps in reserve target and your target rep range, everything else takes care of itself regarding adding weight and adding reps. For example, let's say your reps in reserve across your mesocycle goes like 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 or something like that across 4 or 5 weeks. And your target rep range is say 10 reps. Or your target is 10 reps. Well, each week, as your reps in reserve goes down, you're probably going to have to add weight to hit your kind of target rep range. And once you fall out of your target rep range, so let's say it's 8 to 10. And let's say your target reps in reserve is 1 rep in reserve. And let's say you pick a certain weight, and then you end up getting 12 reps at 1 rep in reserve. Well, the very simple kind of answer to that is that's when you add weight. When you are above your rep range, when you hit your reps in reserve and that's above your rep range, you add weight to bring those reps down closer to your rep range. And vice versa is true. When you are below your target rep range for your reps in reserve, then decrease that weight a little bit. And then over time, as long as you are close to your reps in reserve and you're close to your target rep range on average, everything kind of takes care of itself. And I really don't think that you have to get like super crazy with a double progression or triple progression and stuff like that each week. Just shoot to hit that reps in reserve each week and kind of let those strength gains kind of come to you. And that doesn't mean that you sandbag things and you don't push yourself and you don't really make sure that you're hitting 1 rep in reserve when that's called for. But as long as you shoot for that reps in reserve target and you just make little adjustments based on whether you're above or below your target rep range, I think that everything else works itself out. All right. So that's how I approach adding weight. That's how I approach adding sets. All right. So hopefully that helps, guys. Third question, should you be worried about eating red meat? So I am not like a red meat researcher or anything like that. And there is a ton of nuances to this question. All right. Now, Barbell Medicine, I believe they have got a really good article on this, and they've done really good podcasts on this. And my understanding from kind of their content, so this is based on like what some of these guys are saying, and I trust them, but I trust them because they sound smart. They sound like they're evidence-based. They sound like they're trustworthy people that know what they're talking about. But for you, it would definitely be best, and for me as well, to go try to, well, I actually don't think that everybody should try to interpret research, as there's problems with trying to do that if you don't have a background in doing that sort of thing. So I do think that they are a trusted resource, and I trust them. And I think that I'm at least somewhat decent at vetting individuals. And my understanding of things is that, hey, you know what? It might not be the best idea to have red meat like every single night. And it might be a good idea to limit it to a few servings of kind of red meat per week. But it doesn't seem like just having a few servings is going to have significant impacts on overall health, is my understanding of things. All right. But I'll dig into their content, and if that's something you're really concerned about, and learn more about that. All right. So good on that. Number 4, recommendations for training in the morning. And in particular, it was regarding kind of like they don't like eating like a big meal and stuff like that before they train and that sort of thing. And I would say, if you can, getting in a protein shake or something like that, like 20 grams of a protein shake, maybe a half hour before you go train, I think that has a really nice kind of cost to benefit ratio. For most people, just like 8 ounces of water in a protein shake, it's not going to make them feel like awful during their training while they go work out. And I think that by not going in completely fasted, you prevent a little bit more muscle breakdown while you train. All right. So I think that a little bit of protein, that's going to be really solid. Now, if you could have maybe a little bit of carbs as well, that could help, especially if you're training your entire body, or if you are having a longer session, a little bit of carbs there can help. But I would try to get some of that protein in. Now, if that's all you can stomach and you just don't want to have any carbs, then I think that this might be a particularly good situation to where maybe a little bit of intra-workout carbohydrates could potentially help you out. To where, hey, maybe instead of sipping on water throughout your workout, you sip on like 15, 20 grams of a fast digesting carbohydrate. So some Gatorade. And I think that might potentially help throughout your workout as well. All right. But if you do train fasted, I still don't think it's going to be a huge deal. But I would make sure that if you train fasted, within 30 to 60 minutes after your workout, to make sure to get some protein in, and to make sure to kind of, and that should potentially help kind of blunting any of that muscle protein breakdown that we might see of kind of training fasted. All right. So training in the morning, I train in the morning, but I still get up like a few hours before I go train, so I can still have a normal breakfast and stuff like that. But if you're talking like you're up and you're a half hour later you're training, I would say, hey, maybe like 20 grams of protein if you can stomach it, and then maybe some intra-workout carbs or something like that. But if you can't stomach any of that, then I think this is a time to where it becomes more important to have that post-workout kind of protein and getting that in maybe as close to your training session as possible. All right. So I hope that helps out. And the fifth and final question here is thoughts on kind of food before bed, chrononutrition, and stuff like that. So this is a topic that I studied for my master's degree. Was my specific kind of master's project was on chrononutrition. And to me, it's a super interesting topic because, for a while, people just kind of made fun of people that said you shouldn't eat before bed and carbs after 6 are bad and stuff like that. And that became something to kind of make fun of. Like the evidence-based crowd would throw a lot of, I don't think shame's the right word, but throw a lot of flack at people that would say not eating late at night and stuff like that. And, it kind of fell into nutrient timing for me anyways. I felt like in the evidence-based crowd, it fell into a bucket that it doesn't matter at all. And I think that some of this chrononutrition is shining a little bit different of a light on that to where it's like, hey, when we eat may also matter is to some degree as maybe not as significant as how much we're eating, our total calories and stuff like that. Like I still think that rules the day, but our meal timing does matter, and eating close to bedtime and during kind of biological night, individuals see very different physiological responses to that, to where our body just doesn't seem to be as able to metabolize and process foods that we eat during nighttime. And I personally think that it's probably a good idea to bias a little bit more of your calories during the day and when you're kind of during your daylight active hours. However, there has been research on just having some protein before bed. Jorn Tremelin has done some really awesome work. I've got a podcast with Jorn like maybe a year ago, and Jorn's the man. Super good podcast. Definitely check it out. But Jorn studied this a little bit, and it doesn't seem like a little bit of protein before bed really impacts sleep and potentially benefits your results. So I still think that having just a little bit of protein before bed, still fine to do. And a lot of this chrononutrition research is on non-lifting folks. So I think that a little bit of protein before bed, you're still going to be fine. And I think that my general recommendation lands on, hey, maybe let's just not have like our biggest meal of carbs and fats before bed. And maybe we bias a little bit of those calories, a little bit of those carbs and fats, especially a little bit earlier on in the day. Now, if you train after work and you still have a big meal at dinner, I think that's totally fine. Like you just trained, like I think it changes the game a little bit. Since you trained, you're going to be able to process that pretty well. But if you trained in the morning and then you're saving your biggest meal to right before bed, I just don't think that would probably be the best approach. And I would probably just not have a huge meal of carbs and fats like right before bed. Now, one caveat to this is that a trump card can be being really hungry while you're dieting. And if you can't sleep because you're hungry, that might trump not having food before bed because of chrononutrition reasons. Because if you can't sleep, that can really jack up everything else. So while dieting, you might actually want to place a little bit of carbs, maybe make sure you're really having that protein before bed so you're not getting up during the night and having those food-seeking behaviors and that sort of thing. So as you can see, this is definitely a little bit of a nuanced topic to where during a gaining phase, I would say just a little bit of protein before bed and you're probably totally fine. You're not going to be like worrying about hunger and stuff like that. But during a cutting phase, you might have to work those calories or work that pre-bed meal up a little bit to improve sleep and actually help things out a little bit. All right. So that's my thoughts on that. I appreciate you guys tuning into these. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll answer them in just a couple of weeks here, and have a good couple of weeks. All right. All right. See you guys. Appreciate it.